to everyone. We recorded this on Mother's Day, so happy Mother's Day to you and to any mothers listening. Um, and yeah, I'll also be trying to release
Thank
this
you.
episode on your birthday, which is the 23rd of May. So hopefully we can get that out by then as well.
Okay, thank
Oh,
you.
that's nice.
So,
Thank you. Thank you. It worked out well, huh? Between 2 days.
all right. Welcome back to the Smooth Brain Society. I am Sahid, and this is actually our first international episode. Our guest is zooming in, and so is Olivia from the comfort
Mhm.
of her own home.
Yes,
Too lazy to take the walk up to the recording studio.
exactly. But I can do it from here. Hopefully sounds all right.
We'll fix it in post-production. All right. So our guest today, what we did was we asked them for a few of their achievements and their CV and things like that. And then once we went through everything, we decided that's way too much to cover. But one of the side quests which they have done is they designed an online Urdu learning course. And this was done well before COVID. So online courses were a thing before then as well. And I thought it would be almost rude if I didn't use an Urdu quote to start off this episode then. So I've got one from a famous author called Majru Sultanpuri. मैं अकेला ही चला था जानिब ए मंजिल मगर लोग साथ आते गए और कारवां बनता गया, which kind of translates to I started on this journey alone, but over time people joined me and we formed a caravan. And that kind of encapsulates our guest's work as well. So our guest has 38 years of research experience. 8 of these were working at the Wellington Medical School in New Zealand. Her actual research has covered many areas, including stem cell therapy, regenerative medicine, genetic and epigenetic alterations which cause neurobehavioral disorders, disease diagnosis, and using genetic data for counseling and preventative testing. She has multiple publications with over 100 international collaborations. And most recently, one of these is Your DNA, Your Say, which is a 22-country initiative headed by the Sanger Labs at Cambridge University and is supported by the Wellcome Trust UK. She is also the principal of the postgraduate medical school at Kamalini Hospitals, India, the founder and president of the Board of Genetic Counselling, India, and the founder and co-coordinator of the first full-time program for genetic counseling in India. So welcome to the Smooth Brain Society, Dr. Qurratulain Hasan.
Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you for having me today. And how do you want me to start? Will you start or do I start?
Should we start at the same place we always start with our guests, which is asking them how they got into their field of work in the first place? So a little bit of a backstory.
Yeah. See, my backstory goes really back, and it goes back to school. When I was in the 11th, 12th, there was a chapter called Heredity and Variation. And that really interested me. But in India, what happens if you take biology as your option, everybody wants you to do medicine. And like most people, I thought medicine would have a lot of genetics in it. And I got interested, started preparing to go into medical school. And while doing that, I visited several medical colleges. And to my surprise, genetics was a really, really tiny part of the course, and it was mostly non-existent as a department. So I ran from there. I said, no, I have to go into medical school, but not for non-genetic diseases. So in the 1970s and 80s, the time I'm talking about, India did not have a genetic course and there was no genetic counseling at all. So I did my basic life sciences, that's botany, zoology, chemistry. And only in masters, I was able to do genetics. And then in PhD genetics, and then I did molecular genetics as a postdoc. And that's how I got at it. And now I'm really happy that I've done the full circle and I teach postgraduate medical education, especially the genetic topics and research and postgraduate medical education.
What was it about genetics over other medical areas that really stuck out to you?
See, it was everything. It was if you just see the general population, I looked exactly like my father all the time. Everybody told me. Uh, you must have seen when school children come out of in their uniforms. It's even difficult to pick out your own child because they look all so similar. And one day I was coming out of school, walking towards the bus stop, and a stranger on a bicycle just stopped by and said, "Are you related to Mr. Turabul Hassan?" And I was surprised. I said, "What made you ask that?" He said, "Your mannerisms, your voice, the way you are looking." I had worked with him years ago, and I was, this was pre-Facebook and pre-social media, so you couldn't find people so easily. So he said, "I'd worked with him some years ago back, and I thought I should ask you where he is now." So I was really surprised. I said, "This is genetics, you can't deny it." So there's something which is there. And this, can we go in for preventative genetics, community genetics, health genetics, and all that came into my mind. And I really was keen on doing that. And that's how I must sustain my interest in it. But Olivia, my brother says that I shouldn't be left alone to talk about genetics because I'll never stop. So maybe you should interrupt me and get me on to whatever you want to know exactly from me.
No, I think that's what we want on the podcast. Lots of information.
Yeah.
So can you tell me how genetic counselling works, or what it is exactly? Because I've never heard of it.
Yeah. This is so unfortunate that on one side, genetics and genomics and the information we are getting from it is so vast and immense. And this should benefit the population. And most people don't know it, correct? Like you have yourself said that you don't know. So genetic counselors act as the bridge between this research which is happening to reach it to patients and families so that they can understand, manage, as well as prevent disorders which have a hereditary basis. So genetic counselors, in the vernacular language or in a simple layman terms, explain the complicated things which are considered complicated. Everybody knows that they are inherited. It's obvious. People know it. They've seen their family members suffer, and then they don't want somebody else in the family to suffer. Everything is common, especially for psychiatric disorders, psychological, neurobehavioral disorders, neurodegenerative disorders. This was known for time immemorial. In India, where we still practiced arranged marriages, that was one of the things which were looked in families. In that family, is there any psychiatric disorder? Oh, then we should not get them married. So they knew that there was an inheritance, but they didn't know how it came about. They didn't know what aspect is inherited, how it can be treated, managed, and so on. So genetics per se is as old as civilization, because when civilization started, we came to know that the seed you put in is the plant you will get, and the seed you'll get back. Or the livestock we cultivate is the one which we want to give us milk or eggs or whatever which is edible to us. So we knew exactly, but we did not know the formal aspects of genetics, which came as a science in 1900. And genetic counselors help you understand the role of inheritance in both health and disease. They can tell you about the availability of tests currently there, the management, that is, has gene therapy arrived? Is there any other form of intervention or management? Most people are of the belief that if it is genetic, then it's not treatable. And genetic counselors help them understand that aspect also, that in many things in medicine, we don't treat, like diabetes. You're not treating it, you're managing it. Cardiovascular disease, heart diseases, you are doing a bypass surgery. Again, you are not treating it, you are managing it. You have developed a system to. So similarly, many of the genetic diseases we are think of treating by gene therapy, but many we do it with other forms of management. where we don't, like if an enzyme is missing, you do enzyme replacement. Like when insulin is missing, you give insulin for diabetes. So explaining this. And one more thing which is different for genetic healthcare as compared to other healthcare is that a genetic test result has implications for the whole family. So up till now, we always said medical information has to be confidential. It is very autonomous. Decisions have to be taken by the individual. But now we realize that supposing I do a genetic test and I find out that I'm a carrier for Huntington's disease, whether like it or not, my children will know that they are at 50% risk. My brother will know he's at 50% risk. So it becomes a family thing, and where we need to do the cascade testing and who requires it. So all that is the role of a genetic counselor. The liaise between the clinician, the lab, the patient, and the families, as well as the communities.
Do you think it can answer questions that other areas can't?
Yeah, the reason is, see, genetic counselors are trained to look at a family and community as a unit, whereas other healthcare providers are focused on the individual who's come to them for help, whether it is psychology, whether it's psychiatry, whether it is neurology, whether it is cardiology. The training of the healthcare professional is to make the patient or the person who's come to you as the most important. Whereas genetic counselors look at it as a family, as a community, because certain diseases are more common in certain communities. They are founder mutations, like thalassemia, we know is more common in Mediterranean places, in India, in Africa, not so much common in Caucasian populations, whereas cystic fibrosis is more common. So, you know, it has a very vast effect, which other health professionals don't attend to or consider.
As an educator, as a principal of a medical school yourself, do you think that other healthcare professions should incorporate more genetic research and counseling in their own training programs?
What is important is that people are not aware of genetic counseling as a profession in many countries. Countries like US, UK, New Zealand, Australia, they are supposed to know it. But there also I have realized when I talk to people or families, it's not always, they're not always referred to. So for them to refer their patients, they should be aware. And that's why what I plan to do is I want to increase the role of genetics in undergraduate medical education in India, so that all the medical graduates are aware of it as a profession, and they can reach out to genetic counselors. One, because they don't have that skill and training, and two, it's not their job, because they have counseling only for their tests and all is what a clinician does. But if we are not aware, then how are they going to refer? And in India, the problem is that the numbers are so less that even if they are aware, they don't know where they can refer them to. So it is very important to sensitize all healthcare professionals about the genetics and genomics so that they can make use of the advancements in this field to help their patients. And UK is doing that, NHS, National Health Services. They now, for their re-registration of their GPs and OBGs, gynecologists, pediatricians, they are supposed to take a compulsory online or on-site program on genetic and genomics medicine, so that they are aware of how to convey this information or whom or when to refer. Another thing which is very common now, which we see with the COVID times and the COVID vaccination, every time we bring a vaccination out, it is 5 to 10 years of research. But in COVID, we got the vaccination out in 10 months. That means it has not gone through the rigorous process. And that is why what we are getting, if we are getting adverse reactions or we are getting clotting information, that it's not happening to all. So the companies are trivializing it, but you have to also think that why is it? Because it's the individual's genetics, their host response to the vaccination, which varies. And then you see some people coming back with cardiovascular problems, some people coming back with cognitive problems. So what's happening? Because it's not the infection anymore. We are talking about the vaccine, because vaccine in places like New Zealand and all, where the numbers who were infected were really small, but the number who have been vaccinated are really large. So the data which comes out is not by the virus, it is through the vaccine. So why is this difference in response? Why is it happening? So this is also a big major area where some people are not taking vaccination because they are afraid, and they've heard that some young person took a vaccine and had clotting and died. So they are afraid. So we have to understand why this clotting deficiencies, is it the individual had the increased risk of getting that complication and so on. So there's a lot more to do.
Is there like a test, maybe in the future, that a test that you could do to see how your body would react to a vaccine?
Yes, that's what the plan is. Like we do now, currently, we do a test to see if an individual can take drugs for hypertension or psychotropic drugs. Psychotropic drugs are really interesting and maybe more relevant to this podcast. They are the ones with the very narrow therapeutic range. If you give them in lower doses, they are ineffective. If you give them in higher doses, they cause adverse reactions. That means adverse reactions include sleeping for the whole day. You expect them to sleep for 4 hours, but they're sleeping for the whole day. Or then they start getting tremors and all, which they were not getting before. They may either get insomnia, which is another form of issue. So we look at a panel of genes, and based on them recommend which is the best psychotropic drug, which would cause the least side effects. And not only just the drug, but the dose. And also remember, it's very important that these get excreted. So we also look at the genes which are involved in renal excretion. So we look at a panel of 4 to 5 genes, and based on that, you give the right drug, the right dosage, and the right timing. So similarly, it will happen for vaccination, that you will do a panel of tests and say, okay, these people can take it, people cannot take it, why, and they may be more likely to get adverse reactions.
I'm interested in what the process is like when you go to genetic counselling. So how long is it, and what are you testing for, and would my family be involved in that? How does that work?
Yeah, so we always have a pre-test and a post-test counseling. Pre-test counseling is the time when we get information. So anybody who's referred or comes to you, we have to understand why have they come to you. Have they come to you because the couple has come to you because they have an infertility, or have they come to you because they have lost 2 pregnancies, spontaneous pregnancies, spontaneous abortions, or they've had a child with some congenital defect and who's passed away, or they're looking after a child with special needs and they want to know that the second child is. Or in India, we also get couples who are contemplating marriage, but they are consanguineous. So they want to know whether they may get, there's a higher risk in their children having problems. Cancer, people come to ask us about hereditary cancer syndromes, that my mother had it, can I get it? Cardiovascular disease, that there have been 2 or 3 people in our family with sudden death syndrome. Various people come to you. So the first time is a long session, about 45 minutes, where we take the information, understand why they are with you. what is their major concern. Then we look at the family dynamics in that same session, because sometimes there's a blame game. A child is affected, supposing a child has Duchenne muscular dystrophy, and the mother's brother also had died of it. So the husband is blaming that, it's because of your family that we have got this disorder. So we try to see all that dynamics. We see whether they need support for their child. Then comes the question of testing. In counseling, testing is not the end goal. The counseling is the end goal, to make them understand what, because this can happen again. Then we talk about prenatal testing, the cultural milieu, the legal milieu. Like in India, we cannot reveal the sex of the child through ultrasound. Whereas in all other countries, the sex of the child is revealed, and you have pre-birth parties of, the nursery can be made into blue and pink and all. In India, it's illegal to do it because of the preference of the male-female ratio is getting skewed, and there may be a risk of fetal infanticide. So unfortunately, because there's a law, even if we know it's an X-linked disease, like Duchenne muscular dystrophy, where only boys are affected, we cannot look at the scan, and if it's a girl, leave it. We have to do a prenatal test and say whether the child, which is a bit unfair, because correct, we are doing an invasive test unnecessarily to a woman whom we could have said on the ultrasound that it's a female and she'll be fine. Correct? We can't do it. So genetic counselors know the legal aspects and the cultural aspects of different countries. We should not offer prenatal tests to, supposing religiously, or it's a Catholic person or a Muslim who doesn't want a termination, then please don't subject them to invasive testing like amniocentesis and all, when they are not prepared to terminate and you don't have an alternative for them. So all these things come into counseling and the first session. So the family and the family dynamics. Also, the tests, some of the tests are not covered by the government insurance. They have to be paid by the individual. So who does the finances? So if I am being very appropriate and not wanting to tell the family about it and confidentiality, then I may be doing a disservice to that woman who's not economically independent and needs the support of somebody to pay for the test. So I have to counsel that person also. So all this we assess in the first step: the psychosocial aspect, the financial aspect, and the family dynamics. And then we give them information about what we think are the tests which may be required, choosing the right tests, facilitating testing based on their financial constraints and all, and then being a patient's advocate. So we are also involved in advocacy groups and also in policy making. So that's the first. Then if they do the test, then once the test results come back, then we have the post-test counseling. And in that post-test counseling, we give them the information and the implications of the test for the individual who's come to you. It may be a child, then we tell the parents, or if it is an adult who can or cannot understand, we tell the guardian what it implies, and also see that they are able to take that information. Then the information is not causing more depression, more anxiety, all that. See if they need to be referred.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you could talk a bit about that, because by the sounds of it, a lot of the test results are going to come back in a more upsetting kind of light, isn't it? How do you deal with that, and how are the interactions with patients in that regard?
Yeah, everybody is an individual, so their reactions also are very personal. Some of them have taken their child to so many places that just getting a diagnosis relieves them. They said, oh, at least we know what has caused this. Because for the past 5 years, we are going from doctor to different hospitals. So for them, just the diagnosis helps. And they are able to get a feeling that, okay, this is nothing we did wrong, because that guilt is there. That did we do anything wrong? Uh, did I eat this in pregnancy which caused that, or was I something? There's some sort of a guilt which you relieve them of with the test result. So although the test result is not a very happy one, like Sahir said, but it relieves them. The next is how to manage this test result. The next question comes, is this treatable? Or if they have already lost a child and we are looking at a tissue from a child which they have lost, then we are able to give them information of how best we can manage the subsequent children. That because now we know this, we have a handle of doing prenatal testing, and you'll get to know before your child is born whether there's a problem, and then you can decide whether to continue the pregnancy or not. So then they know that there is a way out. Also, you can dispel the myth that every child is going to. If it's a genetic thing, people believe that all children will have it. No, it depends on whether it's autosomal dominant, autosomal recessive, X-linked, X-linked dominant, and so on.
Could you
Yes.
like give a quick example to explain what you mean by autosomal dominant?
Okay. Autosomal dominant, all individuals inherit genes in two forms, one from the mother and one from the father. Some of the genes, if there is a problem in one, it gets expressed. And the autosomal dominant condition is like Huntington's disease is autosomal dominant, or hereditary breast cancer syndrome is autosomal dominant. That is, even if one of the two pairs of genes has a defect, you will see the disease. So that is dominant. In autosomal recessive, you need both the genes to be defective to get the condition. So as a result, the risk becomes 25% in the pregnancy. If both the couples are carrying this, then the chances of both genes being normal, one being normal, another defective, and both being defective. So you see the risk goes down. And if it is X-linked recessive, and it is in the mother, then all the daughters will be normal and only the sons will be affected. So then the risk becomes further lower. So like that, this is what we explain to them, the risk of recurrence. That's when we also talk about looking at other carriers in the family. Because if one sister has it, then the chance of another sister being a carrier is 50%. So percentages, when we explain in percentages and risks and all, the people comprehend it. Sometimes it's very funny. For some people, 25% is a very, very high risk. And for some 25%, they look at it that 75% is normal, 25%, it's okay. So we have to get that into perspective for them. That it is not that if you have two children normal, the third will be abnormal. That's not the, when we say 25%, or it is every pregnancy has that risk. So explaining that, and that is what is the role of a genetic counselor. Explaining these phenomena, which geneticists take it for granted, to the lay people in their context. I don't have to teach them the whole of Mendelian genetics. I just tell them their part. That if it is X-linked recessive, I just tell them about the inheritance and that. Of course, there's Google, they can look at it and all that. I always tell them that you can go ahead, check it out for yourself, and you can come back to us with questions.
It sounds like quite an empowering thing for them to get that information and for you to explain it to them. And then I guess from there, they can make their own decisions and as to whether to have children.
That's the whole point, Olivia. That's the whole point, that they should be involved in taking informed decisions. And when we, I've looked at the medical ethics, and with Anna Middleton, we are trying to look at in Cambridge, the ethics of science and ethics of medicine. We have so many consent forms. You go into hospital, they give you, you're going in for surgery, they give you this consent form, that consent form, and everything is supposed to be informed consent. But you can ask any patient who's gone in for surgery, how much is there definitely their involvement in decision making? Nothing. It's just to save the skin of the hospital management or the medical health provider, that they should not be sued, because of course they are doing their best, and like every human thing, there may be a judgmental error or a diagnostic error, or it may be a surgical error or whatever. So we take those consents for that. But in genetic counseling, we empower them to take informed decisions, and we support them in their, once they've taken the decision, we try to fix the appointments with the gynecologist, with the pediatrician, neurologist, whatever, if they require surgery. Supposing there's ambiguous genitalia, can you imagine the trauma once a child is born and it is ambiguous? We need to differentiate whether it's a male, female. We need to know whether they require a testis descending surgery, or whatever. So we facilitate that. So it is more like a liaison work.
I like that it really sounds like a wraparound service, like you're sort of there throughout the whole process. You don't sort of give people information and you're like, oh, well, see ya. And then you consider like the family aspects as well.
Most countries say 2 sessions are enough, but in India, we take as many as they want, because they come from far off districts. They are, at the time you're giving them the information, maybe it's too much for them to handle, because you can't be sitting with one patient for the whole day, so you give them enough time. But they sometimes they go back and they think about it. They are in denial. They say, you know, my child cannot speak, or my child has seizures, but they say, no, it's better now. Or I was told by my mother-in-law that one of her sons also started speaking very late, and he's absolutely fine now. So, you know, they try to connect with anything which gives them hope. So you don't try to crush that hope. You say, yes, it's possible, but you see, we have got evidence that there is this report which is indicating that the child has deafness, and because of that, there's a loss of speech, and you have come to us late, and we'll try to get you an ENT appointment to think about a cochlear implant. And then they'll say, how expensive is that? And we say, no, don't worry. There's a government program which we can put you onto, and things like that. So, of course, many of them are in denial. Many of them, supposing we are talking about prenatal testing and we are telling them that there is a problem in the child, and the best option may be for terminating it, as there's no other therapy known for that particular disorder. So for them to take that decision, of course, there's grief in it. You all know better than me about the 5 stages, grief, denial. I don't have to tell you that. Psychology people know more about it than me. Yeah.
Do you incorporate any kind of, what do you call it, like talk therapy or that kind of thing?
No, if we feel that they require more of it, more assessment, then we refer them to the psychologist or psychiatrist based on the situation. We try to convey the genetic part, because see, that's our mandate, that's our expertise. We are not so much into therapy, counseling, all that, but we try to give them the right support, choose the right test, give them the information, ask them to come back again, at which points to come back. Supposing they have a pre-pregnancy, then we tell them, please, we want you back at 12 weeks, we want you back with your ultrasound at this week, or wherever you are. If you're not in our city, then you tell us, we'll give you a contact of a person there, and so on. But we don't take the onus of psychotherapy and all that.
Yeah. And can you explain the relationship between psychiatric disorders and genetics?
Okay. Have you both read a book called Gene by Siddharth Mukherjee?
No.
Okay. That says it so beautifully. It is a very big book, but what it says is that psychological and psychiatric disorders have been pushed under the carpet for years in all cultures. You don't talk about it much because the slight stigma has been attached to it. And it's the same in most countries and including India. So a lot of work was not done, although it was known, it was very clear that this is running in a family. It's an inherited disorder. It's familial, even if they didn't know that there was a genetic inheritance base, but they knew it was familial. And it is not a straightforward thing, because it could be one person in one generation and two persons in some other generation whom people did not talk about because he never came out. There was an uncle, he was a loner. You used words like that. Never really looked at what it was. Now we are calling it depression, we are calling it anxiety, we call it hallucinations. So schizophrenia, maniac depression, and bipolar disease, autism, for these definite genes have been identified. We look at panel of genes, we look at medications which may suit them genetically, and so on. So a lot of work is being done with neurobiology and neurobehavioral biology and genetics. And Canada is really good at that. Janine is there. Janine is a pioneer in that sort of thing, where she's taken only psychiatric disorders and genetics. So it's becoming more and more popular. The common ones, like which have cognitive decline in the end, like Huntington's or Alzheimer's, that has been worked out a lot. PSN1, PSN2 genes for Parkinson, those where the cognition comes in later, but at first we see other signs of it. There the genes are quite well established and we connect them. But for autism and all, we have multiple genes, so we have to look at multiple panels and see what's happening and how it can be intervened and treated.
I don't know much about genetics, so does it mean if I have a certain gene for something, is that certain that I'll get that disorder? Is it?
Yeah, in genetics, what happens, there's some called Mendelian disorders, where if there is a gene variant, that gene variant may cause the pathology. That's a one-to-one correlation. Like BRCA1 gene, if you have a variant, then we don't say that you will get breast cancer. We'll say your risk of getting breast cancer is 8-fold more than the general population. But the environment plays a role. And that's where epigenetics also comes in. So having the same gene and the same variant in the family, all individuals don't get the breast cancer at the same age. Some are getting at 32, some at 48, and some at 60. So what is it? Either there are other genes which are, affecting it by reducing the risk, or there are lifestyle factors which are affecting it. So that is why we say that whenever there is a genetic problem, we look at it whether it's Mendelian. Like if we know there is a specific gene in the hemoglobin gene, one variant alters the shape of the red blood cell, causing sickle cell anemia. Whatever you do, you will get it. That is 100% pathogenic. Whereas there are others where the contribution of inheritance is X%, and then that's because we don't know enough about it. There may be two genes working together, and we still don't know which is the second one. So that's how, when research progresses, they will get more answers to this. But as of now, there are several genes which we know what is the risk, what is the assessment, what is the recurrence risk, what's the thing in the family. But then in others like diabetes or asthma, these are things where we say there is a genetic component and then there's an environmental component. And together the genetic and the environment makes you the phenotype. Genotype, environment makes the phenotype. And that's why lifestyle diseases, we say that if you do these, then you can. But you also have to remember that the genetics comes with different things, like obesity. obesity causing various problems. Obesity is not a single gene disorder. But if you see the genotype, obesity and diabetes, the sumo wrestlers of Japan do not have any of the variants in those 10 genes which are considered to be relevant to diabetes. So they are obese but non-diabetic. Got it? So then the genetic makeup of different populations is varies and makes them at risk for more some disorders and not to others.
One of the points you've made there then, with regards to the large differences within different communities or cultures, what does that have to say about the need for collaborative research in this field?
See, collaborative research is the only way to take everything forward in this era of large data. We want large data and we want inclusive of all communities, the minorities, the tribals, the founder mutations in small populations, and only then we'll have a comprehensive thing. So most countries are now starting their own genomic programs. NHS has it, US has it, Australia has for octarians, Iceland has it, all the socialistic 3 countries, Finland, Denmark, and all of them, they're looking at large population data, correlating it with healthcare. They look with, correlated with, they've got the genomic data. Now they say, this person, how many times has he been hospitalized or she has been hospitalized? What were the diseases? When did they get hypertension? How many times have we filled them with the prescription for hypertension? From what age are they taking? Did that cause colon cancer? You know, these countries have large data, which and a very good medical health record system. And they've correlated. But if you see other countries like Africa, India, where we have large populations and various ethnic groups, we need those data. We also need data from smaller places. We need from islands, Samoan Islands, or we need, so only then we'll get geographic variation. But in today's globalization, we'll also know that why is it that we are getting all mixed diseases? Why is it that before nobody saw sickle cell anemia in US, but it happened only once the first ships full of slaves arrived, and that was known as the coolies disease, because the coolies on the ships were the ones who had that. But now they have mingled up so much that anybody could have sickle cell anemia. It's no longer confined to that population. Same way with the founder mutations for breast cancer. Now we know that there's so much of immigration, so much of travel for work, pleasure, everything. There's bound to be an ethnic mix. But to understand the founder mutations, it's still good to include all kinds of minority and majority populations to get an idea of population genetics and public health planning.
Do you think there are some populations that aren't being represented in the research?
Yes, see, the tests and the countries which have taken it up at a large scale, like the 100,000 Genome Project of UK, they're bound to be more representative of the white population as compared to the Asians and the Hispanics. Same with US. You'll get more of the white population as compared to the black population, because the test may be offered with certain insurances. So that's where the governments come in, and the governments are planning programs where they're doing large scale genomic sequence analysis. The Middle Eastern countries have started now. So Qatar has a program, UAE has a program, Saudi Arabia has a program now where they are doing 1,000 randomly selected indigenous populations and different tribes for genomic sequence data, and then correlating it with the healthcare data. But you have to remember, even Saudi has a lot of money, but the access and planning of this from desert tribes and all, who have not, we haven't got the health records, correct? So matching it up is going to take time. And that's where it is heading. And I'm sure it'll happen in the next couple of years.
Just building on that, how willing are people to actually give their data if you're going around asking 1,000 people in an indigenous tribe to take part and give government their data for a particular thing? How does that go?
Yeah, that brings me to the project which we were doing, Your DNA, Your Say. It's a 22 country initiative, like you mentioned earlier in my CV. What we are in that, there is an online survey, and they're very simple videos which explain what genes are, what DNA is, what healthcare is. And then there is an online survey, which we have tried to analyze and see what makes people donate their data and whom are they willing to donate the data to. And we have got 3 publications on that. And what we have realized is that in every country, there are similarities and differences. And it's most countries have shown that people are willing to give their data to researchers who are not for profit. They're ready to give their data for not for profit researchers. They are willing to share their data with their healthcare provider. Many are not willing to share it with government because of the worry of misuse of data. Many of them are not ready to share it for profit because they said, why should somebody take my data and earn money, and what's the benefit in it for me? And then we started looking into various aspects of it, that what builds this trust to give data to the government. And the trust factor, it varies a lot. We looked at whether age does it. We did a simple thing in India after that. And somehow I believe, I had the belief that older people may be more willing to give data, to share data. But I realize it's not so. It's the younger people who are more willing to share data because they think that sometime in the future we'll benefit. They're also not doing it very altruistically, that they're giving the data for the larger good. They're giving the data with the hope that, in the future it will help them in their healthcare. We looked at males and females, and what we realized is older males are more willing to give than older females, which again was an eye-opener to us. But I'll tell you who are the people who are most willing to give the data. The people most willing to give are the people who have suffered from a disorder or have a loved one suffering from it. Their child, their brother, their parent, and they've seen some suffering in the family. And they, even if they have spent money to do the test themselves, they are willing to share that data because they feel that, somebody will benefit. One more funny thing was, we thought that trust and faith, like the religious thing, you don't understand half of what's happening in religion, but you have faith in certain things. So we thought people who are self-proclaimed religious people, they would be more willing to give. We didn't find that also. It's funny. So what really makes a person want to share their health and medical data and genomic data, I think, is the underlying that comorbidity or that pain and that fear of another person suffering with the same thing which they have gone through. That camaraderie of going through not being able to get a diagnosis, that uncertainty, that makes the people feeling to give. We are about to write a paper on that. And one more thing which has come out from our data is that younger women who are irreligious are more willing to give than younger men who are irreligious, which is funny. We are still going into the things. We have seen that many countries like China, Russia, India, they are not ready to give it to the government. This shows their distrust in their present government. So they're interesting papers. If you have the time, you could have a read or share the links of it for your readers if they are interested.
That sounds good. Are there other things that you're researching at the moment or research interests for you?
One is maybe more relevant to you all than others, that is the neurodegenerative diseases. The neurodegenerative diseases are a group of disorders where a person is born totally normal and starts getting symptoms in the second or third decade of life. And I was really interested in them because, you know, the age when you consider the peak of health, which is 20 to 40, that's the age in which these symptoms come. And that is really devastating for the individual and the family. Congenital defects are more easy to accept because a person is born with it. The family is more used to it. But seeing somebody developing symptoms when they've reached their prime, 20 to 40. So I did research on that, and that, in fact, the effects, and I'm trying a lot of things, and epigenetics is one of them, to see if we could, because a person is born with that gene change, but we start seeing the symptoms later. So can we intervene to prevent the symptoms coming? We can all prevent by prenatal testing, that's one thing, but prevent in the individual who has it. So neurodegenerative diseases which have a dynamic mutation, that is something which I'm really interested in pursuing and following up and seeing but best, because that and epigenetic disorders, I don't know how many of your viewers will be aware of it. We always talk about the father and the mother contributing equally to a child, genetically, correct? But there are about 200 genes which are differentially contributed by the mother and the father, which is a large number, okay? So why did this happen? This happened in evolution. In evolution, if you look at one example of a gene, IGF-2, this is responsible for the birth weight of a child. The father wants the birth weight of the child to be large from all mammals, not just humans. They want a robust child. Whereas the mother knows that if the child is very large, it is not appropriate for her survival and the child's survival. Correct? If the baby, because the uterus doesn't have the capacity, especially in mammals which have litters. If the babes are, pups are very big, then they affect the uterine horn, and it is deleterious for all the whole litter, not just one litter. So the IGF-2 gene from the father is suppressed, and from the mother it's expressed. So this is not because they are gene mutations. We are not using the word mutation so often, but just for that everybody understand. So if the mutation or this gene variation comes from the mother, then the effect is different in the child. If it's coming from the father, the effect is different. The child either becomes large and it causes Beckwith-Widman syndrome. If the child is small, it becomes Silver-Russell syndrome. So it's the same gene, but if it has a change from, depending on which it's coming, the mother and the father. And this change is because of the gene silencing. And that is epigenetics. So there are epigenetic changes. I personally feel maybe we may be able to reverse them more easily than gene changes where we require gene therapy.
You mentioned epigenetics, but could you actually give a little idea of what it is?
Okay. Epigenetics, like the word says, epi means above. So it doesn't affect the gene or the DNA. There is a molecule added to this DNA, which is a methyl molecule, which we call methylation. A molecule is attached to it, which suppresses a gene. Like, see, we all carry all the genes, 22,000 of them in all our cells. But every cell doesn't express all the genes. Like gastric juices are secreted only by the stomach cells. Melanin is secreted in the hair and cutaneous things. What happens to these genes otherwise in other tissues? They are silenced. How are they silenced? Because this methyl group attaches to that gene, thereby suppressing its expression. So you can suppress the expression of a gene or cause its overexpression by removing this group, methyl group. So in a place where a gene doesn't need to be expressed, it gets expressed, again, it causes a disease. It happens for cancer. The genes which need to be shut off get expressed. They may not always be because of a DNA mutation, but because of an epigenetic change, alteration. That is, things need to be silenced and expressed appropriately. Was I clear, or do I need any further clarification for that?
I think that was good. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of these concepts become easier if you are showing it with a figure, but when it's in the audio, it has to be something which they have to imagine. Correct? So it will be up to you to edit it and put it wherever you feel most appropriate.
We should start making YouTube videos then with everything.
I have a couple questions. I think that depression and anxiety are so prevalent these days. What should someone do if they learn that there's a history of depression in their family or history of anxiety in their family? What are the next steps?
Yeah. See, if it is anxiety, depression, go along with joy, happiness, all that. So they're emotions. If we understand that the emotions are age appropriate, time appropriate, then we don't have to worry so much. Yeah, some people tend to have more anxiety, they are more nervous, some are more introvert, some are more extrovert, some share their feelings and get over it, some cry and get over it. So if it is in that normal range, I wouldn't say that you run for a genetic test. But if you see that it is accompanied by, cyclic, or it is accompanied very, very similar to what progressed to something in some other family member, that's the time when you should opt for a genetic test. Now, you also have to remember that as of now, we are in the process of making panels because the human genome was sequenced in 2003, and still there were bits of it which were unsequenced, which got sequenced last month. So we have got the whole human genome now.
What do you mean by sequence? Like it was sort of broken down and
broken down, and we got all the, you know how the DNA is. DNA is the language of genetics, correct? So this language of genetics has 4 alphabets: A, T, G, and C, adenine, thymine, cytosine. Like English has alphabets. The alphabets of the language of inheritance has only 4 alphabets. And these 4 alphabets can make only 3-letter words which give a meaning. So we have the whole vocabulary is 64. Isn't it fascinating that 64 words make the whole universe of living things? So when we say sequencing, every gene has these new ATGC in thousands of things in a particular sequence. It can be ATG, CTT, like that, it goes on. And 3 of them code for a protein, 3 of them code for amino acid. Together, they make a string of amino acid, which makes a protein. And that protein can be an insulin, it can be a skin color, it can be a brain hormone, it can be an opioid receptor, it can be a GABA receptor, and so on. So these need to be sequenced. When I say sequence, I mean this is the whole readout of the DNA of a particular gene is the sequence. So that's when we do a sequencing test to see if this variation, if there's any variation in these genes, which is responsible for the symptom, the psychiatric symptoms. And if supposing it's a GABA receptor, or if it is sometimes other hormones cause depression, estrogen in women who get premenstrual depressions, or they get postnatal depressions, there may be the estrogen hormone levels going up and down or something. So we can help them by doing certain interventions. So sequencing and offering the test is not the panel which is available for psychiatric or neurobehavioral disorders as of now is by no means comprehensive and complete. That's what I wanted to say. So with current knowledge, we make panels. So whatever is available based on that. So we have for schizophrenia, we have for bipolar disease, we have some for autism, but it doesn't cover all the genes which play a role as of now.
So you sort of have ideas of indicators that you might be predisposed to have a disorder.
So we take those indicators based on the neurological pathways, which are the genes involved, what do you think it is? Like vitamin B is a simple thing, but vitamin B causes depression, lowering of vitamin B causes thyroid levels. When they go very high, they cause paranoia, anxiety, tremors. So first what we do is we rule out the physiological causes, which these are physiological, but these also could be genetic. So we do that and rule out the things and look at the panels and do.
Do you think people within their families need to have more conversations around their genetics?
I think everybody should have conversations about genetics. The reason being, it makes it sometimes so much more simpler to identify a disorder if we are aware. But what we realize in today's world with nuclear families and all, apart from nuclear families, conversations between families, when people come in, we always segregate the children somewhere. The children are doing their thing. The men are doing their thing. The women are doing their thing. When you segregate them, there are not so much conversations where children learn what has happened in their families. So we also have a technique which we call in genetics, during taking down their family history and drawing their pedigree, we call it a verbal autopsy. So the people who have passed away in the family, what did they die of? They don't know. What happened? We don't know. My grandmother was old and she died. Or my grandmother died before I was born. Okay. So then if you say my grandmother died before I was born, that means she died young, correct? She couldn't have been that old. So then you talk, if my grandmother died when she was very old or whatever. But they don't know the cause because they've never discussed it. They've never listened to their parents talk about it. They've not been part of those adult conversations. So we try to ask them that, oh, did your parents say that? Was she in the bed for some time? Was she hospitalized before dying? Did she die at home? Did she die in her sleep? So that's a verbal autopsy. We try to get information. So that's why I'm saying it's important to have those conversations in the family, especially with single parent families. They don't know what had happened to the other parent, and then suddenly you get faced. So it does help a lot for early diagnosis if we know the family history. And that is why there was a lot of resurgence in family medicine now coming up. Because now we have realized we did a lot of specialist treatment. For the eye, there was a doctor, for hypertension, a separate doctor, for neurology, and so on.
That's very interesting. I do understand though that it makes sense that these conversations don't come up because often they'd be quite hard to talk about, like people passing away or people suffering from terrible illnesses.
I've seen in New Zealand that they write about your end of care. You see it in hospitals, you see that, please talk about your end of care. What would you like? You know, your preferences and all. So similarly, maybe they should have some posters that say you talk about your family histories too, so that it helps understand, it will prevent a lot of traumatic births. You know, if you know that there's something in the family, we would be able to do prenatal testing or carrier testing. And it would really, especially in these days when we want a single child norm or 2 children at the most. And if that child has an issue, then you can imagine how the family gets affected. So if you knew it, would you be better prepared to do the testing and prenatal testing, find out carrier testing, put you on yourself on surveillance for whatever, whether it's a colon issue or some people say ignorance is bliss. But my biotech company's tagline is ignorance is not always bliss. It's better to know. You can take informed decisions.
Is it okay if I ask one more question to here? I was wondering what you think the future of genetic testing looks like.
Genetic testing, you know, as it is moving from it was only first through clinical geneticists, then it moved to all specialties, especially oncology and pediatrics and gynecology. Now it has moved into all specialties, and it is now moving into direct to consumer testing. Have you heard of that? I don't know what the New Zealand laws are about it, but the US now permits direct to consumer testing for some tests as long as they have a genetic counselor to interpret it. We also have ancestry testing. National Geographic has made a very wonderful program on this, and for Christmas, for the past several years, I heard that is the best present given. You give $100 card for ancestry testing. And why I think ancestry testing is good is that dispels the myth of superior and inferior races. Because by and large, we all end up somehow connecting with each other. And that will hopefully bring about more peace and less of fights with people, but then it will not dispel the geographical boundaries, but at least mentally, it will dispel the geographical boundaries, I feel. That's one aspect. The other aspect is genetic testing, especially for precision medicine. That is, which drug to give. We are overusing drugs. We are overusing vaccines. We are into polypharm. I remember my mother-in-law telling me that, you know, when we were growing up, there used to be a medicine given to us in a doctor's place. We could never buy anything off the counter. And it was once that bottle was given to us with medication, we had to finish it and return the bottle. And that bottle was boiled and was used for somebody else. And she said, now everybody's house is a mini medical store. You keep things for headache, you keep things for sleep, you keep things for stomach upset, and it goes on. So in this era, I think it is very important for us to think of precision medicine, know what is harmful to us, what is good for us, in what dose, and so on. And I think maybe I should end with an anecdote. My sons were playing cricket, and my younger son got hit with a ball. I was taking the video, so I knew exactly where the ball got hit. And there was blood, bleeding, all that. We were in the US, and it took us 36 hours to get him an oral surgery. During that period, I gave him whatever medicines I used to give him, usually for pain relief, and did ice packs and things like that. After his surgery, he was given a medicine for pain relief by the surgeon. Next day, he went into stomach cramps and hallucinations. And when I approached the surgeon. He said, no, 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 no. As far as I'm concerned, I did everything fine. There was no problem. Maybe he got hit in the head when he got the injury. And now he's showing concussion and trauma. I said, what? I know it didn't hit his head. I was taking the video. I saw it. But it doesn't matter. The long and short of it is, I knew it. It was the medicine. The only thing is, in the US, the name of the medicine is not written. On the name of the patient is written, and it is written, take this 3 times a day until finished. So I had no clue what's in it. But I deduced that there must be codeine in it. And he must have, the codeine gets metabolized by a gene called CYP2D6. And this CYP2D6 converts codeine into morphine. And I knew my son had some problem with this CYP2D6, which was making this morphine in excess amount, causing him morphine toxicity. And morphine toxicity gives stomach cramps and hallucinations. So I didn't get a genetic test done there, but when I came back to India in the lab, we did the CYP2D6, and we know he's an ultra metabolizer. So we know that 30% drugs in the market he cannot use because he has an adverse drug reaction. So doing a test, that's what I'm saying. Testing may become the norm later on for precision medicine.
It sounds like it. It sounds very useful and valuable to know.
Okay, and the other value is that I knew if my son had it, the gene I must be carrying or my husband, correct? Where did he get it from? So we did our tests. And my husband kept resisting the test because he said, I have never had such. I said, maybe you never had that medicine before. And that's what it is, that he is an ultra metabolizer. So now he knows which things not to take before ever getting an adverse reaction.
Mm-hmm. Whereas otherwise, if you don't test, you only know when you have an adverse reaction.
So you may get it, you will get it with something. Now he knows which drugs will cause the adverse reaction.
I think that's a great anecdote to end on. Sure.
Thank you so much.
There's one last thing which we do, which is we go through a few quick fire questions. Now, the problem is I am the only one who has all the questions here because Olivia doesn't have them with her. So
that's okay. You could ask them.
Should I just run through them?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully we get a sponsor for this at some point. We don't have one yet. But maybe you can help us with that, considering you're in contact with 22 other nations through the My DNA, My Say study. But whenever you're ready.
Okay, right. I'm ready.
Awesome.
Shall we start?
Let's do it. Summer or winter?
Summer. Summer for me is mangoes and jasmine, so I love it.
Movies or TV series?
Movies before, and now I'm on to TV serials.
If your life was a movie, what genre would it be?
Comedy.
Morning, noon, or night?
Night.
Outdoors or indoors?
Indoors. I go outdoors only with you all, not other, with the children. Not.
Cats or dogs?
Neither. The reason being that we have a lot of chicks and hens, and both dogs and cats are anti-chicks and hens.
What's your weapon of choice?
Words. I'm a teacher, so sarcasm gets people.
I would have thought you said genetic testing, but
yeah, no. See, I'm a counselor more, so it's the words.
What is heavier, a ton of feathers or a ton of steel?
Both the same ton.
Right.
I've not gone senile yet. Huh?
Okay. Which superpower would you like to have?
To end genetic disorders. So maybe my Superman would be the one doing gene therapy, replacing the bad genes with the good ones.
What is the ugliest fruit or vegetable?
Taste-wise or looky-wise?
Up to you.
So then it is the datura. Have you seen it? It has porcupine-like things It is like a green ball with porcupiney things. They make it look. Do you know that?
I've never seen it. I'll have to Google it after.
You can check it out. Vegetable made mostly in North India. It's somehow
Somehow still in existence.
yuck. No, no, not very nice. Yeah.
What is the worst thing you've paid money for?
You know, I'm such a bad shopper that every time I go and buy anything, I think it's at a loss because I never end up liking it. So I think it was a sari for my mother because she still cribs about it and says that you bought it in such a hurry and it's not very nice. So I think and I spent a lot on that.
If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
It would be New Zealand.
That seems like a common theme between everyone's answers, doesn't it, Olivia? We've had a lot, even people.
I think
who
that's
aren't-
good. That's cool.
Yeah.
We should hit the New Zealand government up, use us as advertising. Okay. What quote or saying do people say which you think is completely wrong or is completely bullshit?
That early bird catches a worm.
Why is that?
For two reasons. One, it makes you believe that only people who wake up early are the ones who are going to get all the wonderful things. And two, nobody ever thinks of the worm because the worm also is a living being. What's good about him if the bird rises early? So I think it's not such a win-win situation.
Do you have a version of there are two types of people in this world?
Yeah, I do have it. The ones who enjoy things and the ones who find fault with everything.
Okay, what's legal but still feels illegal?
You know, being rich, being too rich, because it is legal, but somehow it's unfair to so many other people. When you see the disparity and all that, it feels illegal. I don't know whether you agree or not, but that's what I feel.
Okay, what type of researcher do you think is the best to be at a party, and why is it a genetic counselor?
Yeah, because in a party, there are all sorts of people, and a genetic counselor is able to converse very nicely and is a good conversationalist for a party and a good communicator. And that's why I think it's a genetic.
If you were not doing this, what would you be doing?
I can't imagine myself doing anything else. I do all the things which I like and I love doing it. Doing poetry in Urdu, doing genetics, teaching, training, being with young people, helping patients and families, all those things. I think I wouldn't change it for anything.
Okay, so the very last question, if you could give us one piece of advice to leave with, what would that be?
Nothing succeeds like success. Once you are successful, that becomes your iconic thing, that becomes something which people will emulate. And I would also like to end with a favorite couplet of mine in Urdu, which says, अच्छा है दिल के पास रहे पासबान अक्ल, लेकिन कभी कभी इसे तन्हा भी छोड़ दो. Which means it is nice to always have your intellect guard your emotions. But sometimes just let the heart do what it feels like. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. If people wanted to get in touch with you, where would they be able to contact you for work?
Directly, I think you all can share my email with them.
Yep, great. We can do that on request. I think that'll be safer. That's perfect. Well, thanks everyone for joining in. Thank you again, Dr. Hasan.
Yeah, it was very nice to meet you. I feel like I've learned a lot.
And until next time, nothing succeeds like success.